What is up, mathletes? So welcome back to the episode of Math with Dr. Math, and today we're going to look at how to solve absolute value equations. So this is a part 1 of 2 series, and in our next video, part 2, what we're going to look at is absolute value inequalities. So make sure you subscribe and you hit that like button so you don't miss out on that video. All right. So what we're gonna do, if you're anything like me, you see math definitions. I remember being in class and looking at all these math definitions from my textbook, and I'd be like, what the heck is this saying? All right, so today I wanna do the translation for you. I wanna make this easy. So when we look at our absolute value definition, what this is saying, remember, the absolute value represents a distance. So whenever we're talking about a distance, what this thing does is if you give me a negative distance, a negative number, it turns into a positive number. And if we have a positive number, it remains positive because a distance, the smallest distance that we could have is 0, right? You never jump on a treadmill and after you finish, you're like, oh, I ran -5 miles, right? What does that mean? I don't know, maybe you gained weight. All right, so again, when we look at distances, which is what absolute value represents, a distance from 0 on our number line, we only look at positive numbers, or 0 if we haven't moved. So this is what this definition tells us. That's what it represents. So let's get into the process. How in the heck do we solve these absolute value equations that look something like this, right? So you have an expression, we're taking the absolute value of that expression and it equals some constant. So here's our steps that I'm gonna walk you through today, all right? And I'm gonna tell you what to look out for. So number 1, you wanna isolate, get that absolute value by itself, all right? Step number 1, very important. Then you have to identify what is the absolute value equal to. So is it equal to 0? Because if it's equal to 0, good news, you have only one solution. We're gonna see that play out. Or does it equal a negative number? Even better news, because then you're done. Because then we know there's no solution. Because we just said absolute values cannot equal negative. They could be 0, they could be positive. They can't be negative. Or does the absolute value equal a positive number? If so, you're gonna have 2 solutions. So that's exactly what we're gonna look at today. So let's go ahead and let's dive in. All right, so here I have 3 examples that we're gonna be looking at, and these 3 examples are gonna set the scene whether we have 1 solution, no solution, or 2 solutions. So let's take a look at what the heck did that just mean. All right, so for part A here, notice we have the absolute value of this quantity here, right? This expression, plus 7 equals 7. So step 1, what step 1 told us to do is we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna subtract 7 from both sides. So when we subtract 7 from both sides, look at what we're left with. We're left with the absolute value on one side, and now our 0 is isolated. So that's what's meant by step 1. Get that absolute value by itself. So let's point this out now. One side, because one side equals 0, right, there's gonna be one solution. All right, so that's what the steps were telling us. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at this one solution. So we have 3x plus 12 equals 0. So now we remove those absolute values, right? Get that absolute value out of here. And we look at what's inside, which is the cream filling, and you set what's on the inside equal to 0. So let's go ahead and let's solve this mother sucker here. So you subtract 12 from both sides, bam, and you're left with 3x on one side, and you're left with -12 on the other. And we know we're gonna go ahead and divide by 3, and divide by 3, and you're left with x equals -4. So just like we said, we end up with one solution here. So now we have that first situation under control. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, part B here. Let's take a look at what we have. So now we have the absolute value of some expression, and plus 7, and now it equals 2. So same thing, we want to isolate the absolute value, get it all by itself. So we're going to subtract 7, we're going to subtract 7. All right, so I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. And so what we're going to see here is, now that those 7's cancel, right? So now that those 7's cancel, you're left with the absolute value equals a -5. So notice here, this number, what it's equal to is negative. So because this equals a negative number, there is no solution. Get that equation out of here. No solution for this one, right? Because whatever we plug in here, there's no way that it's ever going to equal a negative number. So that's good news for you, because you're done. There's no solution, right? You might write it like that, you might write it like that, you might write it as an empty set, right? So regardless of how you put it, there's no solution. All right, any questions? No. Perfect, let's move on. All right, so in our last example here, what we see is that you have the absolute value plus 7 equals 9. All right, so same steps. We always isolate our absolute value. So let's go ahead and isolate the absolute value. I'm going to subtract 7. I'm going to subtract 7. All right, so we're left with the absolute value now. After you subtract 7, those 7's cancel. So the absolute value is equal to 2. So now we have the absolute value equal to a positive number. So because this equals a positive number, there are 2 solutions, right? I'll keep one, you can have the other. And so here's how you handle it, all right? So here's how you handle it. What you do is that quantity, the 3x minus 7, you set it equal to a positive 2, and you also set that 3x minus 2 equal to negative 2. So you have 2 equations. And the reason is, let's check this out. Let's think about this. What's the absolute value of 2? Well, that's 2. So that'll give you this answer over here. But that's not the only thing that will give you a 2. The absolute value of negative 2 also gives you 2. So for that reason, what we do is we let the absolute value, what's on the inside, equal positive 2, right? Because this positive 2 gave us the answer 2. And we also let this 3x minus 7 equal a negative 2. Because when you take the absolute value of negative 2, you also get a positive 2. All right, so make sure that you set up these 2 equations. So what I like to tell my students is one of them is going to be positive, right? One of them you're going to set equal to the positive of that number, and the other absolute value, but remove the absolute value signs, is going to equal the negative of this number. And that always happens, right? Even on Sunday. All right, so let's go ahead and move all this up, and we'll go ahead and we'll solve each. Actually, these are easy enough. We can leave it right here. So let's go ahead and solve this. So I'm going to add 7 to both sides. And we're left with 3x equaling 9. We're going to divide both sides by 3, divide by 3, divide by 3. And so we're left with x equaling 3. So this is one of my solutions. We have x equals 3. So that's one of our possible solutions. Let's do the same thing on our second equation. So let's go ahead and add 7, add 7. So you're left with 3x equals 5, right? Because negative 2 plus 7. And now we divide both sides by 3. I have a little bit more space here, so let me go ahead and divide by 3, divide by 3, and you're left with x equals 5/3. So notice we have 2 solutions. So let's go ahead and let's write them down. So we had 5/3, our smaller number, and we had 3 as our other possible solution. Boom, so there are our 2 solutions. And I could read your mind. I know what you're thinking. But Dr. Math, what happens if I have an absolute value on both sides? That's when I just say, quit math. I'm just kidding. All right, let's take a look. So let's take the absolute value of 2x plus 1, and let's set that equal to the absolute value of x plus 3. All right, so what we do here is the process never lies. Step 1, you isolate an absolute value. Well, the absolute value is already isolated. In this case, you have 1 on each side. All right, so now what it told us is that you might have 0, 1, or 2 equations, right? So here's what you're going to do. Pay close attention. So for one of our equations, whenever you have an absolute value on each side, you're going to pretend that those absolute value signs don't even exist. So you're just going to remove them and don't even worry about them. So that's one of your equations is always going to result like this, right? So all we did is essentially we're looking at what happens when the absolute value, when the inside equals this positive number. Our other option is we take one side, and it doesn't matter which side, and you slap a negative in front of the argument, what's on the inside. So negative x plus 3. And what we're doing is we're looking at what happens when the inside is a negative number, right? Just like we did before, but right now it looks a little confusing because now you have an expression. So let's recap. So all we did is for our first equation, we remove the absolute value signs. And for our second equation, you pick a side. Pick a hand, right? One of these sides, you're gonna make it negative, and you get to decide. Regardless of whatever side you choose, you're gonna get the same answer. All right, so these are our 2 equations that we're gonna solve. And now we just solve. So let's go ahead and let's, subtract x from both sides. So many different ways of doing this. So you get x plus 1 equals 3. Go ahead and subtract 1 from both sides since we're solving for x. And one of our possible solutions is 2. All right. On this other side, we just have one additional step and we distribute the negative sign. So you're left with 2x plus 1 equals negative x minus 3. So let's go ahead and add x to both sides. Add an x here, add an x there. Right? In real life, I don't recommend adding too many x's to your life. And we're left with 3x plus 1 equals negative 3. Let's go ahead and subtract 1 from both sides. And so you're left with 3x equaling negative 4. So now let's solve for x. Divide both sides by 3. So there you have it, folks. We're left with 2 answers. X could equal 2 or x could equal negative 4/3. So our final solution is negative 4/3 or 2. And now you know how to solve equations that have absolute values on both sides. All right, so that's it for today. But don't forget, help us out, help the channel grow. So hit that subscribe button, like us, and we'll see you next time, mathletes. Peace.